Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the October 10th, 2017 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It is my privilege to call this meeting to order. There are copies of our meeting agenda on either side of the room on the community located shelves. If you haven't already done so and would like to pick up a copy to follow along with tonight's proceedings, I would welcome you to do so. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment, both with respect to the items that are on tonight's agenda, as well as a section under item 5, which is reserved for public comments of a general nature. Any questions or comments that members of the audience have at that point in time regarding matters that are not on tonight's agenda, I will let you know, remind you when that time comes, and we would welcome hearing any questions or comments from members of the audience at that time. But first, it is our proud tradition to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. So at this point, I'd like to ask everyone to please rise and join us in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. I'd like to now ask our fine village clerk, April Holden, to please call the roll.
Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Earl?
Here.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Here.
Commissioner White?
Here.
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Barnett?
Here.
Mayor Tully?
Here. Thank you very much. It brings us to item 3, which pertains to the minutes of prior council meetings. We have one set of minutes to approve tonight. Those are our regular council meeting minutes from our October 3rd, 2017 meeting. If there are no changes, questions, or comments, I'll entertain a motion to approve, please.
Mayor Tully, I move that this council approve our meeting minutes from October 3rd as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Those minutes are approved. That brings us to item 4, which pertains to proclamations. And I have one proclamation to read, which pertains to Fire Prevention Week, which is this week, October 8th through 14th of 2017. And there are lots of activities going on to remind folks of the importance of Fire Prevention Week. And we'll begin that by reading the following proclamation. Whereas the Downers Grove Fire Department sponsors an annual fire prevention program, and whereas the Downers Grove Fire Department's primary concern and interest in the protection and safety for life and property in the village of Downers Grove, and whereas the Downers Grove Fire Department renders a vital public safety and prevention service in the village of Downers Grove, and whereas the observance of Fire Prevention Week provides an excellent opportunity for individuals to check for fire hazards and test smoke detectors in their own homes and businesses. Now, therefore, I, Martin T. Tully, Mayor of the Village of Downers Grove, do hereby proclaim the week of October 8 through 14, 2017, to be Fire Prevention Week in the Village of Downers Grove. And to receive the proclamation, I would like to invite our fire chief up to receive it and then share with us some information about what's going on in the village this week. Chief? We'll bring you up here where the X marks the spot. Get you guys on this side. Please. Thank you. Thank you. And Chief Podolsky, if you'd like to share a few things with us about what's going on this week, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for this opportunity to speak this evening and also for recognizing Fire Prevention Week 2017. In 2016, over 1.3 million fires were reported in the United States. These fires resulted in over 4,000 deaths and over $10.6 billion lost. Every 23 seconds, a fire department responds to a working fire somewhere in our country. Every 34 minutes, someone sustains an injury due to fire. And every 2 hours and 40 minutes, someone perishes due to fire. Appallingly, the richest and most advanced nation in the world, our country, at one time led all major industrialized countries in per capita fire death and property loss. This was recognized as far back as 1973 with the publication of a text called America Burning. We've come a long way but our country still ranks among the highest regarding those statistics. Many measures, which are often very simple, can be taken to reduce these losses significantly. Our community is not exempt from this. Yes, the number of fires has decreased by approximately 66% over the last 40 years, but the severity and implications of these fires has not changed at all. The fires that we see today are much different than 40 to 50 years ago. Larger homes, more open spaces, increased fuel loads, void spaces, and changing materials, as opposed to the past, have led to faster fire propagation, rapid changes in fire dynamics, shorter escape times, and quicker times to structural collapse. Average home sizes are now just as large as some commercial structures without the blanket of being subjected to the same building or fire codes. Changing and increased fuel loads have significantly affected the fluctuation of the time temperature curve as it relates to a condition called flashover. This is a condition in which no one can survive in the area of fire. Items once fabricated out of natural materials are all now made out of plastics. The heat, energy, and toxicity released when these items burn has increased exponentially. We face an even greater challenge than in the past when we discuss fire safety and escaping from a fire. During Fire Prevention Week, we resolved to protect ourselves, our families, and our communities from fire. We encourage all citizens to install and maintain smoke alarms, as well as sprinkler systems where applicable, change smoke alarm batteries on a routine basis, develop and practice a fire escape plan that includes at least 2 ways out of each and every room, and follow safe practices in our everyday lives. As we mark Fire Prevention Week by recommitting to awareness and preparedness, we also extend our thoughts to all those who have been affected by fires. Their sacrifice will never be forgotten, and in their memory, let us rededicate ourselves to preventing tragedy before it strikes again. The fire department will be participating in 2 special events this week that I would like to invite all to attend. Tomorrow, on Wednesday, October 11th, is our annual Night at the Firehouse, taking place from 6:30 to 8:30 at Fire Station 105 at 6701 Main Street. This is an opportunity to attend safety demonstrations, learn more about your fire department, and it's a chance to meet our great firefighters. Friday, October 13th will mark the 23rd Annual Fire Department Silent Parade, which is dedicated to firefighters and civilians who have lost their lives due to fires. The parade will start at 7 p.m. in Hinsdale and will pass through Downers Grove on Maple Avenue at around 7:15 p.m. We look forward to seeing everyone at these events. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Chief Mendelski. Appreciate those sobering words and for reminding everyone of the activities going on this week. Thank you very much for all you and the fire service do for our community every day and keeping our residents safe and sound. Thank you. I have no further proclamations, so we'll move to item 5, which is reserved, as mentioned earlier, for public comments of a general nature. At this point in time, if there are any members of the audience that have any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to items not on tonight's agenda, we welcome you to please come up to the podium. Tell us who you are, and glad to see you. Welcome.
Hi, Mayor Tully. My name is Linda Brown. I live at 1010 Hickory Trail. Several weeks ago, on July 18th, a lawsuit was settled between the Village of Downers Grove and the Bradley Land Group. The Bradley Land Group was awarded $1.45 million plus other expenses. That resolution was approved on the consent agenda. The background section on the report to the village was 6 lines. The lawsuit dates back several years. On tonight's consent agenda, there is a contract with V3 companies for $603,000 of additional work which the village needs to pay according to the terms of the lawsuit settlement. That totals more than $2 million. In addition, the village paid outside attorney's fees to defend this lawsuit. I know you council members are civic-minded people, and I appreciate the time and effort you put in week after week. I know you all believe that village government should always be open, honest, and transparent. That standard needs to apply to the bad news as well as the good news. Celebrate the good news, but when there is bad news, I believe you are obligated to provide the public with the details and some explanation. I'd like you to be upfront about what happened. I think perhaps a report should be posted on the website. Taxpayers are concerned about where their money is going, and this is a lot of money. My questions are, and I understand all of you may know more about this than you care to remember. The taxpayers don't know anything about what happened. So my questions are, what happened? What went wrong? What's the history of this? What is the total cost to the village, including outside attorney's fees and staff time? And finally, why was this on the consent agenda?
Thank you. I'd be happy to address those questions offline, which are a little bit more complicated than perhaps time allows here tonight. I will say that for anyone in that neighborhood, they've been aware of this challenge for maybe close to 2 decades now.
Right.
It's a project that has been sorely needed for many, many years and has been held up. And I know that the residents of that area have been asking for this project to be completed for 2 mayors ago at least. And part of it is I think it predates all of us up here. It's been going on for so long. The allegations and whatnot that was happening in the lawsuit are all matters of public record. I think they've been reported upon in the press over the years. We were just glad to bring this to a conclusion. I think it's a fair conclusion that allows the village to get back to the business of making the necessary improvements to that area in a way that will benefit not only the immediate neighbors but also the entire community. I think the biggest driver we have is this is a project that has been waiting for a long time to get done. It's certainly not going to get any less expensive as time goes on. I think everyone was very anxious to get the neighborhood back to where it probably should have been 10 years ago. But happy to have that conversation with you offline about more of the details.
I'm not understanding why it should be offline. I think there's lots of people that don't live in the neighborhood that have lots of questions. I mean, I was looking over the budget today, and the budget for non-personnel portion for next year is $11 million. This represents 1/5 of that. That's a lot of money. And I think there needs to be a public discussion about what went wrong and how we came to owe this developer this gigantic amount of money.
Well, it's certainly, there's aspects of it that I can't really discuss with you in public. There are aspects that predate everyone up here, so I can't go back in time and really talk about what happened 15, 17, 20 years ago. I wasn't there.
I understand that, but
All I know is that we inherited a problem that needed to be addressed, and I think it's been addressed in a fair and responsible manner for the best interest of the neighborhood and the community. And my understanding is that all my colleagues who were given an opportunity to also try to solve the problem were in support of that being resolved. I know the neighborhood's thrilled. This is finally moving forward. We've heard communications from people in the neighborhood thanking us for this finally being concluded and being brought forward. It's unfortunate it took as long as it did. It's an entire street project. It's a detention facility that's been held up for quite some time, and it was time to move forward.
well, I understand about the stormwater and I understand about the streets. What I don't understand is why do we owe Mr. Bradley $1.45 million?
I actually don't, you have me at a disadvantage. I don't have the details at my fingertips right now, which is why I said I'd be happy to discuss it offline. I don't like to try to have conversations when I don't have the information at my fingertips that would allow me to appropriately answer your questions.
Okay, so then why was it on the consent agenda?
Because everyone had consented to it, and it was an agreement.
I understand
We
that.
often will deal with that with other agreements. It's not that unusual.
Well, it's an unusual amount of money for the village.
Not necessarily. There have been other public work projects, and again, I don't have them at my fingertips.
It's not a public works project. We gave $1.45 million to Mr. Bradley for, I don't know what.
The details are obviously in the agreement, but they include being able to go forward with the project, which includes the land that's involved.
And
Again, you have me at a disadvantage. I wasn't prepared to answer this question, so I don't have the details at my fingertips.
well, I'm not looking.
I'm happy to discuss
I'm
it.
not looking for details. I'm looking for the big picture.
Well, and
And I-
that I can't answer. The big picture, again, was that this is something that has been going on for a very long time, to the detriment of the neighborhood, the detriment of the community, and this was an opportunity to resolve that in a positive manner, both for the neighborhood, which has been long-suffering, quite frankly. And again, this goes back to 2 mayors before me when all this started, and I think everybody...
But you were a commissioner for a big part of that time, and
Right, well, like I said, way before I was mayor, but I think before anybody was up here. And it's just unfortunate it's gone on that long. There are lots of details we could talk about, and I could tell you all about how litigation happens and how the average case takes anywhere between 3.5 to 7 years, which I could go into that. But the big picture is this was an opportunity to resolve this for the benefit of the neighborhood and for the community, and I think it was done in a responsible manner.
and you don't feel like the other people that don't live in the neighborhood are entitled to some little understanding of what happened?
As I said, I think there's a long public record of what the allegations were in the lawsuit that have been available for many years for anyone who was interested in it.
Well-
I'm happy to go back and brush up on it and go through it with anyone who would like to discuss it. Again, you have me as a disadvantage. I do not have that at my fingertips right now.
Well, again, speaking of the budget, I won't be able to attend that meeting, but I really feel like there should be some sort of footnote in the budget explaining this to the general public that isn't privy to all the things you guys are privy to. It seems unfair that we as taxpayers are in the dark.
I'd be happy to come back and point you to things that would help shed some light on that.
I think it should be a public thing. I think I'm not the only one interested in this particular discussion.
I'm sure. As mentioned, a number of folks in the area have sent notes to us saying thank you for resolving this and moving forward. It's long overdue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. And I'm serious about my offer. Be happy when I have an opportunity to properly prepare to answer your questions. I'll be happy to do that.
Okay.
Other questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to items of a general nature, things not appearing on tonight's agenda? Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening, Liz Chalberg, 1132 Curtis Street, President of Downers Grove Historical Society. I would like to invite the general public and your viewing audience to save the date of October 21st, when the Downers Grove Historical Society will once again be hosting the Living Cemetery at our downtown historic Main Street Cemetery from 10 to noon that day. There'll be 15 theater students from Herrick and a number of theatrically inclined adults who will once again be portraying our pioneer settlers who are buried in the Main Street Cemetery. During this event, local children's author Marilyn Ludwig will be launching her new book. She's written a number of books geared towards middle school aged children, and her most recent book is entitled The Ghost of a Tree Remembered, and it's set in Downers Grove. It starts in the cemetery, ends in the cemetery, and it tracks some youngsters who open a magic door at the band pavilion and accidentally end up in a time traveling back to 1863 at the height of the Civil War. And the book tells us how they get back to Downers Grove. So Marilyn has graciously offered to not only launch her book at the Living Cemetery event, but to also donate a portion of her book orders that day to the Historical Society. So come out and visit with our settlers and get some Christmas shopping done at the same time. This is happening at the same day that the window painting occurs, and so it's going to be a wonderful, busy day in the downtown. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Appreciate it. Other questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to things not on tonight's agenda? All right, very good. Well, appreciate those who did share some things with us. That will move us to item 6, which is our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Martelli, I move that this council approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the village council? Roll call, please.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Consent agenda passes unanimously. And that brings us to the active agenda. We have no items on tonight's active agenda, so we'll go right to the first reading of the workshop agenda. This is where items are presented for discussion purposes only. No final action will be taken this time. Typically, we ask, we're allowed, we ask staff to introduce the items and provide background information, and the council usually starts off with some questions and comments, and then we'll turn it back to the audience for questions and comments before wrapping up. And again, no final action will be taken at this time on any of these items. We have two items tonight, and with that, I'll ask our village manager, David Fieldman, to please introduce them. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Tully. Thank you for the introduction. As you said, there are two items on tonight's first reading agenda. The first is an ordinance increasing the number of beer and wine recreational facility licenses. Here to present background information on this item is our village attorney, Enza Petrarca.
Thank you, Dave.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. An ordinance has been prepared to increase the number of recreational beer and wine licenses from 1 to 2. Staff's received a request from the Fun Zone, which is proposed. They're proposing a family entertainment center at 2011 63rd Street, which would include a children's arcade, bumper cars, and a laser tag facility, including a restaurant. Currently, we have 3 full alcohol recreational licenses issued, 1 to Q Billiards, to the Tivoli Bowl, and the Downers Grove Sand Club. We only have 1 indoor, beer and wine recreational license issued to the Indoor Golf Legends indoor golf facility. So we're simply requesting to increase that from 1 to 2. This will not automatically entitle the applicant to a liquor license. They would only give them the opportunity to apply for the license and proceed through the process and have a hearing before the Liquor Commission to determine if they are in fact qualified for that license. That is all. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Just a real quick question. This isn't creating a new classification. This is just taking an existing classification and making another one available for someone to pursue if they meet all the hurdles that anyone else would have to.
That is correct. This ordinance simply changes the number 1 to 2. That is all.
Okay. Thank you. Questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Waldeck?
Thank you, Mayor. I've had a lot of problems with what I call design of ordinances. This isn't necessarily designed for this particular case, but it seems kind of putting the cart before the horse. We are asked to increase the number of licenses with a particular applicant in mind so that they can go back to the Liquor Commission and ask for the license. And if they make it, fine, and if they don't, we have 1 extra license hanging out there. I think I have a problem with the process because I think the Liquor Commission is, in order to expand the number of licenses, you start asking questions about the potential applicant and why, and you start getting into the questioning that really should come from a more experienced Liquor Commission. And the process that I would prefer to see is having them go before the Liquor Commission, asking for the additional license, and then coming before the council, getting let's say a provisional or a recommendation from the Liquor Commission that a license be added and approved by the council. And that recommendation should come from the Liquor Commission. I think they're much more able to come up with the right questions and the right concerns rather than us thinking about adding another license for something, but we kind of know, but we don't really know. I just think we're doing this the wrong way, and I'd rather see it go before the Liquor Commission with call it a provisional recommendation for an added license and an approval. Given that, I don't know what I intend to do with the actual voting when this comes on the active agenda. Thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Burnett?
Is it, I'm a little confused about process. Can you get a sort of hearing, and there isn't a provision for a provisional license, is there?
No, there is not.
So I think I understand what Bill's saying. I think it would require changes, though, to other things in order to even facilitate, right? I mean, the idea that we would change the direction or the order of this thing would have to be sort of a separate conversation that transcends any of the existing license holders or the existing liquor commission or this body. It's how the direction of the process is a whole other conversation, right? Am I missing it?
I agree. I think, well, technically, this is just a change in the number. I mean, we should
Yeah, right.
be considering who the applicant is, simply whether we'd be willing to increase the number of recreational licenses within the village. It comes to us with a specific request from a specific business, but in the past, we've also increased the number of licenses, for example, for other facilities. I know we have additional licenses out there that are not all filled. For example, restaurant license. In this case, we just simply do not have one available for this particular applicant.
That's typically the process, though, with relatively new relatively
Right.
new classifications are often defined and then defined as one, and then sort of to see what happens, so to speak. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Earl?
Is that was kind of my question, how did we come up with one to begin with?
Because it was kind of a new license, we only licensed the ones that we currently had available. We
Okay.
weren't sure what it was going to entail in terms of activity and,
Because we have 3 full-service,
Right.
correct, licenses, and only 1 beer and wine, so it wasn't like 3 and 3 or anything like that.
No.
We just,
it was specifically limited to establishments that we had, the current licenses. And we do have that in certain, for example, the entertainment license is the same. We only have the number of specific businesses that hold it.
that fell into that category when the court category was created originally. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner White?
When Game Pazzo closed, did that create a vacant or unused license?
Yes, and I believe it was the Sand Club that
That picked that one up?
picked that one up, if I recall correctly. They had a full alcohol.
Other questions or comments? I understand what Commissioner Waldeck is getting at. We just have never had a provisional license approach to Commissioner Barnett's point. It would mean a fundamental change in how we handled it. We just never done it that way. And I understand where you're coming from. My concerns with that approach, though, is it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg type of situation because no applicant's going to ask for a license and go through all that work to demonstrate if there's not even a chance of getting a license, which is why creating the license is the first step so that someone has something to apply for. And in the interest of being a facilitator of business, if people want to come to our town and start a positive, productive business in our community, I'd like to at least give them the shot at it. That doesn't mean they're going to get it. So that's one concern I have. The other one is, and it's actually a very similar concern about a provisional license in the first place. My view is that we should be creating categories of licenses that are more designed to address a type of business, not a particular business. My concern is that if we ended up deciding to grant a certain license around a certain business, it almost by nature would be a designer license because it would only have the input of that business. I would rather come up with a category of a type of activity or a type of business, not particularly any one particular applicant or one particular license. So creating another license that already exists is, I think, more neutral and not designed to anyone. Where it will come down to that business that then applies for the available license would be their particulars that would have to be demonstrated just like any other business that asks for a liquor license, going through the full liquor commission process, which ultimately makes a recommendation one way or the other to the liquor commissioner, who happens to be me. But obviously I put great stock in the liquor commission's recommendations. So I don't have a problem with creating an opportunity for a business. They still have to go through all the hurdles of convincing the liquor commission that they are worthy of a license, and then ultimately I will have to agree to that.
I'm just wondering if we, instead of just going to 2, maybe we should go to 3?
Well,
Which then
yeah.
kind of prevents this from happening again, because now the license is there and it's
Right.
available for somebody who would then go straight to
Sure.
the liquor commission.
And the only reason I think in the past that we've been somewhat circumspect is the wrong word, that we've tried to be more limited in the number is particularly, I think Commissioner Barnett said it, when a new category is created, we don't know what the experience is necessarily going to be, so we don't want to put 5 or 10 out there, and all of a sudden we end up with all these people applying for them, and maybe we've now invited something we don't want. Which if you keep it limited, you're able to see what the experience is. We have some experience now, so I think this would be different, and we wanted to go to 3 so that other businesses might be interested in coming to our community, which is certainly something that we are trying to foster. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. We
And
just
it's-
picked one because we know that there's one person who's interested in it.
Right, and I understand that, and I was just thinking, though, this is the beer and wine, this isn't even the full liquor license. So
Right,
it
fine with me.
it would be, yeah, I just think it would
To
be,
make it 3 and 3,
yeah,
and if the rest of the council is, no, we don't have to decide that tonight, obviously, but if the rest of the council were in favor of doing that, that would be fine with me. Because again, it doesn't give anybody anything, it just creates an opportunity for someone to apply, they still have to prove they're worthy.
right.
Commissioner Barnett?
And one more thing to add, just some more context. I spent, 8 years, I think, on that liquor commission, and there is always this balancing act that the village has tried to do between recognizing that some of the public safety and welfare challenges of liquor consumption, distribution, sales, and balancing that with, as the mayor said, trying to be facilitators of people wanting to invest and put roots in our community. And so that, Marge's point is well taken. Once we do get a little experience, then maybe it does make sense to revisit quantities. But that's certainly the reason, that has been the reason for 16, 18, 20 years, that we try to keep a relatively tight control on liquor sales, distribution, and consumption, at the same time balancing this facilitation. So that one always allows us to get into it. And there's the idea of design or ordinances or codes or licenses is certainly one to be cautious of, because if you just start making rules just for small groups, it certainly has the potential to go a bad direction. But in the case of liquor, I suggest that, reflecting on the last 20 years, it's served us pretty well, this process of being willing to create licenses when business models are brought forward, and then limiting those licenses until we learn about them. I think that's pretty useful and solid technique.
Yes, and we do try to achieve that balance. Obviously, having a liquor license and the ability to sell liquor is a privilege, not a right, and we expect people to be very responsible in both their application and their conduct with it, and when they're not, the Liquor Commission is not shy about making recommendations with respect to sanctions. We take it very seriously. So either way, I think I have no problem with what's on the table as a request, but I also don't think that if it went from 1 to 3, that would be, or I'm sorry, instead of going from 1 to 2, went from 1 to 3 would make a significant difference. So I would leave that to the preferences of my colleagues. Any other questions from the council? Any questions from the audience on this item? Any final questions from the council? All right, well, very good. Next item, please.
The next item is the discussion of potential amendments to our stormwater management regulations. This is a priority action item for this year and was a priority action item a couple times in the last several years. It's been an ongoing discussion among the council and community. Here to present information on this item is our Public Works Director, Nan Newland.
Thank you, Dave.
Good evening, Ms. Newland.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As Dave said, we're going to be talking about potential amendments to village regulations. The focus of this is to reduce the negative impacts of stormwater runoff from residential construction. So it's pretty specific. So we're going to be talking about capital projects later for stormwater. That's really more overall design and projects that benefit large areas. This is really more neighbor-to-neighbor type of issues that we hear about as staff. This was presented about a year ago to council, and the report that you found in the packet was also presented a year ago. It contains a lot of information. I'm not going to try to go through that in detail tonight, but I am going to go through some of the major issues we see and touch on those items that were recommended by the Stormwater and Floodplain Oversight Committee. But I'm open to talk in more detail about anything anybody would like to talk about or has questions about. This map shows the locations of the 430 new homes that have been constructed between 2011 and 2017 in the village. While construction complies with village regulations, there are sometimes negative impacts to adjacent properties, which generally are the result of 4 conditions that we see as staff when we do site visits at these locations. The first one is where new impervious area is usually the result of tearing down one home and building a larger home and adding more impervious area, where there's construction in established areas that lack adequate stormwater management systems and infrastructure. And the streets highlighted in yellow on this slide are examples of areas in the village that generally have minimal stormwater conveyance systems, either pipes or ditches. And this is because many areas of the village were developed before the 1970s, which is really where stormwater management regulations started to become effective in different communities. There started to be a realization that we just couldn't keep building houses without putting in detention that served large areas. So up until 1970, homes were built, and this basic infrastructure was not a typical part of construction. The second condition we see is where there are significant grade differences between properties that cause increased runoff from the construction site to the adjacent property. Ideally, there would be a low point between the 2 homes, which would allow runoff to be directed between the homes and either to the front or to the back, depending on how the grades worked in those areas. So that is often difficult to achieve in some of the areas in the village where we have a lot of grade changes. The third condition is where sump pumps from generally larger homes, and a lot of times builders are putting in deeper basements these days, where that groundwater, there's substantially more groundwater that's being pumped from sump pumps from these deeper basements below ground. Groundwater is water that is below the ground. It's in rock seams and sand seams, and a lot of times those basements are built below that water table. I added a slide here. We get a lot of complaints about groundwater, not just where there's new construction, and I think it's not well understood. The groundwater in the village varies widely. This slide is kind of your typical water table. The blue shows groundwater. In this case, it's maybe a foot or so below the footings of the homes. That's typically the water that's intercepted by a sump pump and discharged outside of the home. That groundwater level can fluctuate through the year. It can be high during certain seasons and lower during others. It can get higher when we have a major rainfall. A matter of inches can really matter. You can be a couple inches above the water table and your sump pump not run. The water table can change by as much as an inch or 2 and your sump pump does run. So it's very unpredictable. They can dig a foundation in an area and the hole can be dry. A couple months later, the sump pump can be running. It's not just a standard table all throughout the village either. It can be a sand seam, like a small, I wouldn't call it a creek, but an underground seam of water that a basement can just be dug right over that seam. There can be old drain tiles. I'm just trying to say there's a variety of situations. It's very hard to predict. It's hard to regulate. And when a new house comes in, because the deeper the basement, the more likely you are to have issues with groundwater, just because you're going deeper and could potentially be getting into that groundwater seam. The fourth condition is where there's a lack of infiltration from the runoff due to high clay content in soils that's compacted during construction. Clay is one of the predominant soils in our area just naturally, and it's made up of tiny particles that are easily compacted when construction occurs. They're running large equipment over it. scrape up the material, put it to the side, dig the hole, smooth that material back over the site, and it's run over by machines. It makes it harder, more compacted, and so it doesn't absorb the water like it used to before that construction occurred. So this is another condition that we see that contributes to runoff from new properties. With these conditions in mind, and to help address these issues, in 2016, staff identified some potential changes. Now, there's so many different conditions and situations that there's really no one-size-fits-all solution. So that's why we came up with kind of a menu of options to consider. And these options were vetted before the Stormwater and Floodplain Oversight Committee in 2016. We did get quite a bit of resident input. They came and talked about different situations that they've had in their neighborhoods. And we attempted to score these, you'll see the different columns here, by an indication of effectiveness, of the cost, and of the administrative burden. How much staff time would we be spending working with them, reviewing designs, inspecting them, and then with ongoing maintenance to see if we could find those areas where we can make improvements at the least cost and least resources. So this is a table showing all the different options that were considered to address these conditions. And in that report that was part of the packet, we broke down each one of those and gave a little bit more detail about each one. The first one was to look at putting in on-site detention for each individual lot. And as you can see, while this might be very effective, it is also, I think, the costliest solution and also the most burdensome as far as staff time working with builders and property owners. For example, an average single-family home in the R4 district would be looking at probably an underground vault in the size of about 20 foot by 20 foot by about 4.5 foot deep to contain that kind of water, which would then need a release, a way to drain that water, and it would need some kind of a restrictor, which would be difficult to maintain. This option was not recommended to move forward by the Stormwater and Floodplain Oversight Committee when they took a look at these options, for the reasons that I talked about: high construction costs and significant maintenance for homeowners. The second one on this chart is to require sump pump discharge for all new construction to connect to an infiltration device, such as a rain garden or a dry well. This item was recommended for consideration by the committee. This was seen as a way to help mitigate a lot of the problems we're seeing with sump pump activity from new construction. It would be required with the development, with the project being built instead of being a retrofit later. And it would also provide a little bit more storage to mitigate runoff. The third one is to implement a maximum impervious and or minimum open space requirement. This item was also seen as recommended for approval by the committee and is seen as one that would have a high level of effectiveness without a lot of cost. And that was recommended for consideration. The fourth one was to require the installation of additional PCBMPs, post-construction best management practices, which we currently require, for basements deeper than 9 feet. This was a mitigation strategy the committee did not recommend considering because there really is not a direct nexus between the depth and sump pump running. While you can say it contributes to it, it isn't generally a direct correlation. They didn't feel that just because you had a deep basement meant that you were going to have water. You could have a deep basement and your sump pump never run, I think was their concern. So they did not recommend consideration of this item. Number 5 was to eliminate the building coverage bonus for detached garages and front porches that are currently in the village code. The committee did not recommend moving forward with this at this time. They just thought this was more an item to be considered along with zoning and planning issues and better addressed as part of the lot coverage or open space requirements than by looking at this option. Number 6 was restrict foundation and or finished grade elevations. This was also not an item the committee recommended moving forward with. They thought that it was typically could be addressed by the designer, by the engineer as they looked at each lot, and they thought it might tie people's hands too much in the design. That was the opinion of the committee. Number 7 was to reduce the minimum size of the foundation drain from 4 inches to 6 inches. The thinking was that there would be less flow in sump pumps. They did recommend moving forward with this because they considered it a very low cost, but also not very high effectiveness item, but a low cost item. The 8th one was to increase the minimum side yard setback in the R4 zoning district to 6 feet or 10% of the lot width. This would address that issue with the grade change. They felt better than by other methods of a grade change. They thought this would provide more room in between the lots to have more options with grading between the two homes. Just 2 more. Number 9 is to increase the stormwater runoff storage fee and/or fee in lieu of for constructing post-construction best management practices. This was one item that they did recommend consideration for. Typically, a single-family home pays about $800 right now in the runoff storage fee, and they thought that could be increased to be used as a pool of money to increase for things like cost share programs, things like that, to improve neighborhood drainage. The last one was to remove the current post-construction best management practice requirements that currently require these facilities whenever there is an additional 700 square foot of impervious area on a lot. They did not recommend consideration of this because they felt that while they're not always a solution for a lot of the issues we're seeing on these lots, they felt like they did provide storage and water quality improvements and did have some downstream benefits, although maybe not as much as they could be. So with that, that's just a rough overview of the items included in the report. And
I just wanted to amplify on number 10. 10's kind of an outlier there where we're talking about actually reducing or making less restrictive code amendment we put in place in 2015. And the reason for that is the staff experience on many of these developments that are subject to that regulation is that it's not working properly due to the high clay content in the soils. And in an effort to mitigate negative impacts, we actually are not very effective in doing that. And it is not supported by the home builder, the person purchasing the new home, nor the neighbors. And it puts the village, frankly, in a very poor light because all parties involved are not satisfied with our service and we're falling short of everybody's expectations. Imagine being that staff person on the site with all those folks looking at you saying, hey, why do you require this when it's clearly not working? Now, that being said, there are a handful of cases where it does work. It just works better in certain conditions when there's a certain type of soil and the right amount of grading circumstances. So this is one that our stormwater engineers in the field, they feel pretty strongly that we should consider going back to the county threshold of 2,500 square feet and at the same time put in place a handful of the other things recommended to address the concerns about stormwater issues. So I just wanted to amplify that site as something that comes up nearly every day in community development.
And that you're really talking about the rain gardens not working.
Yes.
In many locations. They might work some places, but many places they're not. And then require them to go in when they're not being effective in a given location is probably not doing anybody any favors.
The council may remember some folks coming here from Oakwood a couple of months ago last year, and sort of all parties were not satisfied.
Right. And just a question, and I'm sorry. I would agree with not making it mandatory no matter what, because if it's not working, that makes no sense. But wouldn't want to remove it as an option if it made sense in the field, given the judgment of professionals involved. But to force it to be done in all circumstances, when we know that the constitution of the soil, whatnot, is not going to make it work, then I don't know why we would force it. Sorry, as long as I was on. Commissioner Jose.
Thank you, Mayor. Sticking with this, the option number 2 here requires sump pumps to connect to an infiltration system, specifically references things like rain gardens and dry wells. If we're going to at least consider not forcing people to have them in cases up to 2,500 square feet, it sure as heck doesn't make sense to have them connect a sump pump up to it, does it? I mean, why would you pump into something that's not working?
I think it would depend on the condition of the site.
It also depends on how much water you're trying to put there. Are you trying to put just the sump pump water in there, or are you trying to put all the runoff from the whole
Well,
site?
and there are other things that could be done. I would agree with you in some, wherever a rain garden would make sense to have that connected, there's no reason to do that. However, a French drain, for example, or something else could be very effective. And I know I've spoken this before, is because I did it at a previous home, where we had a sub pump and a downspout issue that was creating a area that would have caused problems with my neighbor, but didn't want to have that. So we ended up putting in this long, basically it's a long trench that is filled with rock and a long pipe that has holes in it, wrapped in fabric so it doesn't get clogged. And you put all the water into it, and over a long period of time, it actually worked very nicely. Now that was very effective, and I think what I'm getting at is let's use practices that are actually effective in the field, not say you've got to ram a square peg into a round hole. But so you're right, it may make no sense for a rain garden, but there's something else that might work great.
Just a very quick question, though. The type of French drain you're discussing, does that qualify as on-site detention?
There's retention. Because it didn't stay full. It would, over time, dissipate. It worked really well.
Those are usually more to diffuse the kind of the point source of the discharge. They're not really storing water.
Right, or I have that backwards. Detention is holding it, not retaining it. Sorry, I had it flipped around.
Also, just wanted to add, as we get into this discussion, it's pretty clear that, as Dan mentioned, there's no one solution fits every scenario.
Right.
We have a variety of situations that are frankly very challenging. So we're really looking for a combination of tools and regulations that staff could apply with a little bit of judgment and frankly some level of predictability for the homeowners and the neighbors. So it's easy, right? If it had been easy, we would have put these regulations in place decades ago. So it's a significant challenge.
And the ones that work, you never hear about again.
Correct.
For example, in my situation, it worked like a charm, and that was great, never had a problem ever again. But those aren't the ones we hear about. We hear about the ones that don't work, and that's where I think we need to have other options. Commissioner Earl?
Number 7, can we go back to number 7? That one kind of seems counterintuitive, and I know, Dave, at some point you and I have talked about this, but maybe Nan could explain why going down in diameter is better than staying larger in diameter, mostly for the general public, because it didn't make any sense to me until you explained it.
I'm not sure that it would make a huge difference. There was a lot of discussion about this at the committee meeting. I think 4 inches is more standard in codes. I think the village's code, I'm not sure exactly why the village code is 6 inches. And I think their thought was by slowing down the water a little bit, it would help not have as much of a discharge from sump pumps. I'm not sure how effective it would be.
The smaller pipe gets less water into the sump pump, which means less water getting pumped out. And we think this, actually, it was a code amendment that was initiated for a different purpose and then got applied to footing drains. And the real concern here is home builders have to special order 6-inch pipe, and it's hard to get, it's costly, and it doesn't really have the effect that it doesn't improve anything. So it becomes
Does
a
that
barrier.
help pull water away from the foundation more quickly?
It can, and sometimes it can actually get more water into the pipe more quickly as well.
Which if you're getting just unneeded groundwater, it's just causing it to run faster.
So we really don't know why it was changed to 6.
Yeah, we went back and researched, so we think it was applicable to a different purpose and then got applied in this setting. So this is one that, frankly, staff strongly recommends we should just go to a 4-inch standard. It seems to be working in all other communities. It's less costly and more predictable.
Thanks.
Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't need an answer to this now. Frankly, I should have included it in the council questions and slipped my mind. I'd be curious to know how many communities have regulations on basement depth. And specifically what those regulations are. Do they say 9 is the maximum? Is it less than that? Is it more than that? It would seem to me to be logical that the deeper you go, the more water you can end up getting. One of the big complaints we get, in addition to the size of a particular home that's going up in a neighborhood, and now I've got water in my basement than I did before. Another one is, hey, they've got this just gigantic basement, it's incredibly deep, and as a result, I've got more water, or at least they perceive they've got more water. So I'd be interested to know what other communities do in that situation.
Thanks. Thank you. Commissioner Waldeck.
Thanks, Mayor. About a few weeks before I ever got on council, I was getting calls from an elderly woman who never had water problems before, but we would spend about an hour on the phone every month at least. She would complain about the new house next door that was elevated an extra 3 feet to solve their water problems and created a water problem for her backyard. And that kind of stuck with me. This looks like an opportunity that maybe we can somehow address the elevation issue. I don't know if you can set a standard restriction for everything, but I would like to see some sort of guidance or something where you would restrict some elevations so that you don't affect the neighbor next door or the people downstream. I think the one item that seems to solve a lot of problems, not everything, is the number one. And it was rejected because of the cost. And I understand that, but there is cost and there's maintenance. If you don't do it right, you're going to have a lot of staff time coming back and forth, trying to resolve problems with complaints and everything else, and you still have a problem. What I would like to suggest, and would maybe not solve the entire problem, but on new construction, if you would require something like that, yes, it's expensive, let's say $7,000, whatever that cost might be, that would be added to the price of the purchase price. That would generally go on a mortgage and paid off over time. And what we could do is, since this would resolve a lot of the problems and future problems, that we could, in the meantime, waive our stormwater fee until the property owner gets their money back. So they would have a mortgage. They would be able to deduct the cost of that construction, that extra cost. And in the meantime, they wouldn't be paying a stormwater fee until they recover that cost. And so I think that would be an incentive over time to solve a problem and eventually break even. Just a thought.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Barnett.
Thanks, Mayor. Commissioner Waldeck certainly jumped on the train, I think, is the right one here. That one of the things that we know from experience is that none of these sort of nipping at the edge solutions are universal to the community. You have site conditions that are unique to every site, and therefore some places best practices work, some places French drains work, some places, Mayor, like your house, slowing down the flow rates can help. But the one thing that we keep coming back to, or I keep hearing from, and certainly Bill has said he has too, the reality is that we are, unless we do something like number one, we are we are saying we are okay accepting new developments' negative impact on their neighbors. I've not been okay with that for a while, and I'm glad to hear others are starting to think that's a problem. The cost and administrative burden are there is no doubt. They are complex situations, they are difficult situations, they are expensive, and they sometimes still do not work. That's a possible outcome of any engineering solution. But I think that the conversation I'm hopeful that we'll all entertain and make decisions on is really one of council setting policy, not necessarily doing stormwater floodplain oversight committee and staff work. The policy question is a philosophical one, I think, and it's, do we believe that we should cause no harm with new development? I do. The harm to the immediate neighbors is real. The harm to the village is real. We're spending, don't know, what's the number, Dave, $32 million since '07, something like that, $35 million, on improvements to try and make sure that infrastructure is ever more capable, and we're taxing it ever more when we don't compel people to take care of their own water. When we go back to that map that Nan put up to start with, it's no surprise that those redevelopment opportunities are happening where they happen because people take advantage of older homes. Those are the ones that are ripe for redevelopment. They're the ones that people can walk to town. Those are also the ones built between 39th and 59th prior to 1973. So it's a problem, every one of them. And the problem is either bigger or smaller, site-specific, so it's manageable or not manageable, like we saw in Oakwood sometimes. But that number one answer, causing people to have to deal with their water on site, the water they create above and beyond the existing condition, is something that, from our perspective, will solve most of those problems and certainly give the right indication of what we intend and how we expect development to go. Commissioner Waldek's idea of rebating stormwater fees is an excellent one. An incentive is a great thing. I'd be more than happy to add that if we thought it was, sort of a olive branch from the council in exchange for the regulation. But whether we do or don't, I think it's the right regulation to try and put in place. This is not a new problem, Mayor. You've been hearing about it for 20 years. People that come in and say, I've lived here 45 years, and until those 2 new houses came up, I never had a problem. Now I get water every time it rains. It's a real issue that I think is only truly solved with that first item. The others are, we can, take or leave the commission's recommendations. Obviously, there's some value to staff in trying to minimize the negative impact that they have to deal with every day. But make no mistake, that first one is going to be a burden on staff. All those pencils are there for a reason. That's a tough deal. That's not easy. It's not cheap. It is hard to do. But I think there's no question it solves the problems that we really are trying to solve.
Well, I'd actually flip around the other way and suggest, considering that the stormwater utility could be used in a slightly different way to actually help facilitate the administrative activity that would be necessary to make that happen. That's actually what it's for, is to achieve that outcome. And that might be a different way to think of it, rather than reducing the amount that we have, use it to achieve the objective, which clearly managing all stormwater on site and properly understanding the stormwater, not groundwater, is certainly an objective that we've had for decades. Commissioner White?
Well, I'm now of the opinion that having mandatory on-site stormwater detention is a necessary tool in the toolkit. I'm not yet persuaded that every lot, every new house needs that. There's parts of town where maybe it may be overkill. I don't know enough yet about it for sure. But as they say, nipping at the edges, there are definitely lots that these other techniques are nipping at the edges. So I'm definitely on board with the idea of finding a way to include mandatory on-site detention as a tool in the toolkit. How extensive? Don't know yet. That's going to take a whole lot of work to figure that out. I also want to say, though, I'm very, very nervous about using the stormwater fee for anything policy related. It's a fee, not a tax. And when we start messing with that, we risk the fundamental legality of it, that we just can't play with it like we can with tax incentives. So I don't think we can give any stormwater fee credit unless we have a clearly documented link between the reduction in village costs and the action taken. Then it stops being a fee and it starts becoming a tax. And we've already done a few things that make me nervous that we're not exactly obeying the distinction between a fee and a tax. And the referendum says we're doing this, but until we avoid future legal challenges, we got to do it right. So I'm not a big fan of using the stormwater fee to incentivize this or incentivize that. The fee is the fee, for it has its purposes. We find other ways to accomplish other things that we want to accomplish.
Commissioner Holman?
Thank you, Mayor. Picking up on Commissioner White's thought there, the idea of using the fee to subsidize in this particular case would actually be giving the homeowner a break when all they did was keep the status quo. I think if we're going to consider giving somebody a reduction in their fee, it should be because they took action affirmatively in order to make the situation better. Switching gears, I absolutely agree that we should have this idea of on-site detention in the toolkit. It's an idea that I recall Commissioner Barnett bringing to me several years ago, and it absolutely makes sense, at least in certain situations. What exactly those situations are, I'm willing to let the engineers say it makes the most sense in this area or that area or what have you, depending on whether it's a floodplain or whether it's an LPDA or other conditions. But I think it absolutely should be a tool in our kit moving forward.
Thanks. And just to be clear, I wasn't suggesting, I agree we should not be giving credits to incentivize anyone to do anything on private property. I was suggesting that a properly funded stormwater utility could potentially alleviate some of the administrative burden of having to oversee the facilitation of on-site detention.
Or just increase the building permit fee to cover those costs.
Sure, do that too. I was just trying to look for that correlation. Commissioner Barnett.
Nan, I got a question that don't feel compelled to answer it tonight, but there's a difference between requiring on-site detention and requiring what I've referred to in the past as zero net change. So what I'd be interested in is whether we thought from an administrative facilitation standpoint that would be, like, I'm going to use the term easy, I don't mean any of this is easy, but easy for us to ascertain as a matter of normal process of permit review and approval, because I think to Greg's point and also to Commissioner White's point, if your goal is to not make the situation worse, there would be sites that wouldn't necessarily have to have on-site detention as a function of redevelopment. Whether that's easy for us to process, I'm interested in hearing more about that.
We can take a look at that.
Just to pick up on that, because I understand that on-site detention, I was wrong earlier, you were talking about detention, not retention. I know there are calculations that are performed as to what the appropriate amount of volume is and what the detention needs to be. But I just don't remember. How does one measure zero net change? Can that be measured in the field? Because obviously that's what we're trying to achieve. I'm just trying to wonder how does that measure? Can that be measured?
It's typically measured by release rate. So you look at a certain size storm, you have a certain impervious area that creates runoff from that size of rain event, and then you size the volume to detain that water, and so that you're trying to have your release rate or the runoff from that site kind of replicate an undeveloped site. So kind of like you say, do no harm. You're trying to kind of make it replicate how it was before the site was developed. So that's how you kind of back into the calculation for the size of the detention.
I see. And then maybe I'm not asking my question properly because I'm not. As a practical matter, how do you measure the runoff before and after? Is it done through calculations, or do you actually have something that's measuring how much is going down the driveway? How would you really know that you were not achieving any net?
Topography and calculations and modeling.
It's all calculations and modeling.
It's a model.
Okay, that's what I was getting at, as opposed to actually measuring it.
There are no engineering models for this size of a storm. I mean, usually you look at a lot bigger area. I think you would basically do as much as you could do to mitigate the water runoff.
Okay.
There really is not an engineering model for this size.
I got it. Well, that answers my question. You're basically looking at the topography, and you're looking at how much rain you're based on historic information would come down during a certain event, and how much that would generate. Okay. Thank you. Got it. You're not actually out there with a.
And actually, the recommendation, the item they looked at as a committee, was to consider on-site detention when the net new impervious on the lot was more than 700 square feet. So if you have an existing home and you basically just took that same footprint and put a new home on it, it wouldn't be required. It's only in the case where you were increasing the impervious area on the lot by more than 700 square feet.
I can foresee a lot of footnotes, adding garage patios, garage pads, as to when the obligation would be triggered. And that's usually complicated and no quick answer.
Yes, very ad hoc. Commissioner Waldeck.
Yes, in reference to what Commissioner White said, maybe we could have maybe staff could look at the legality of such an incentive, and to Commissioner Jose's point, I don't think it's not the status quo, because the current property isn't detaining anything. It's just a status quo, and the idea of adding a detention system would actually be an improvement, I believe. So it wouldn't be the status quo, because right now there's something happening. Maybe it isn't a big deal. Maybe all the neighbors downstream aren't getting flooded, but they're getting something. And if you detain it, you are actually making an improvement.
So we could look at those concepts together and look at the concepts of just trying to maintain status quo in terms of release rate and flows, and then also the concept of trying to make the neighborhood better by managing stormwater that would otherwise be publicly managed on private property. There's a couple of ways to go about looking at that, and we can get you some information on both.
Thank you.
Just want to have this thought about, the magnitude of the stormwater fee versus some of the costs. Some of the costs I'm seeing for certain detention systems, if you have $1 million house, you may be looking at a $50,000 or $60,000 system, and you're looking at paying $300-400 a year in stormwater utility fees. So to tell somebody you got to put in a $60,000 detention vault, and by the way, you can save $175 a year in your stormwater fee, kind of, the order of magnitude is such that it becomes trivial.
It turns out that it would outlast your mortgage.
Well, it would take 45 years to pay off.
But you wouldn't necessarily have to demand that they put in a $60,000. I think we were looking at previous, we're talking 10,000, 7,000, maybe even much less. This is a menu, you kind of, you do what works. You do the minimum, but you do what is actually going to work and not be a problem down the line. Some of this stuff is just temporary, or best practices aren't necessarily the working practices.
I have a question. When we have a new house under development, is there any way, if we are not mandating, say, the detention facility, that they can go ahead and put one in, that we might be willing to cost share that through the cost share program right up front?
And we'll roll that into that question that was just raised, that we'll look at that aspect of it too.
Sharing, if we're sharing, if we're going to have a problem down the line, maybe it makes sense for us to incentivize somehow. So maybe that is that if this is going to be required of them, that they can take advantage of the cost share program. And maybe we have to grow the cost share program. That might be the result, but at least it's better when it's not mandatory, I'm thinking, when you've got an incentive to want to do it.
My incentive was not having an angry neighbor. That was my incentive. It was entirely voluntary, but the on-site detention was recommended to what might work, and it worked great, but it was mainly because one had the keys to the neighborhood. And this isn't the current place, by the way. This is prior place. Commissioner Barnett?
I just want to kind of piggyback on Commissioner White's comments about magnitude and cost. As it relates to some of the conversations on this chart, and also that probably others will have online about the idea of in lieu of, the areas, many of the areas in question, as we know, are really deficient in existing stormwater infrastructure. And so when you start talking about in lieu of, I think you would find those conversations sound, like an effort at trying to be amenable on the front end, but are probably nowhere near the magnitude required. If you would have to take a block or 2 blocks or a stormwater shed area and improve or even add existing infrastructure, the numbers are way beyond what you ever might accumulate. If 6 new houses went in on a block and you grabbed an in lieu fee from all 6 of them, you're still probably hundreds of thousands or millions short of required infrastructure. So just something to keep in mind as we consider the concept of in lieu on a variety of things. This, of course, is a much smaller number, but I suspect as this conversation develops, we'll hear alternative in lieu of commentary. It's probably nowhere near enough money.
And there's a practical aspect to the timing of construction
Yeah.
too. When a person pays that fee, there's an expectation that the service follows closely behind, and there's some very practical challenges to retrofitting neighborhoods that are literally hundreds of years old and trying to get those complete systems in. So that's one of the reasons that it's on the list. It's not staff's favorite. The fee in lieu creates several challenges that we just talked about.
The builders love it. They write a check and they're done.
Yes, the problem is it doesn't actually solve any issues. It sometimes can just create more expectations than we can put in the field.
Right. All right, should we open it up to questions or comments from the audience? And we can always come back to the council. Thank you, Nan. I'm sure don't stray too far away from the podium. There might be technical questions. Questions or comments from members of the audience? Good evening, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Jim Garst. My wife was here, Jenny, no, she's here again, last week. We're at 5234 our court, right over by Official Park. We're in that area between 39th and 59th with all the new construction. Wanted to thank you for giving us an opportunity to talk about this. Before you guys talked about it, I was looking at effectiveness mostly. That's what's really going to help us. So I was really looking at the top three. I was very encouraged to hear a lot of discussion. The second point, the second one, and kind of the comparison between, Greg, I think you said, between the rain gardens down below and the option number 2. I wrote the same thing down. I said, the water's got to go somewhere. And if the water doesn't work in rain gardens now, it's not going to work getting pumped into rain gardens. It's all going to flow downhill. I'm encouraged by talk of multiple options. We are very much in favor of the requiring the detention on site. You talked about, a little bit of judgment, flexibility. We do understand that this is not necessary all over the village, and understand there may need to be options, but the water has to go somewhere. If there's too much clay in the ground and the infrastructure isn't there to handle the water downstream, it feels like the only effective option is to hold the water somewhere until it can go downstream. So from an effectiveness standpoint, the only option on here to us that looks like it's going to work to actually meet the goals of reducing the amount of stormwater runoff, improving resident satisfaction in the areas impacted by this, would be the online detention. I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that with us. Other questions or comments on this topic from members of the audience? Take your time. Safety first. Good evening, welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name is Anna Jackson, and I'm also on for our court. I feel a little hypocritical because I am one of those new big houses that dumped water down next to my favorite neighbors, the Garsts. But I'm new to the area. We moved here 2 years ago, having never lived in Illinois. I'm from New Jersey, so I'm trying really hard not to say water because that is how I pronounce the word. Lived in many different states, lived overseas, and when we were looking for homes here, I had my list of all the suburbs and where we wanted to go, and we came down to, Downers Grove and just said, we want to be here. We really liked it here. Had some other cities, though, that we were also looking at, and the main thing holding us back from moving here was the pond at the end of the street on the house that I loved, but I could not get over the fact that there was just water everywhere, pond at the end of the street, and the pond is not a pond, it's someone's backyard. So we went back and forth, and finally we did talk to our neighbors, and they explained to us what they've done to try and mitigate the water. You know, putting in permeable pavers on the street and everything that can be done. We talked to the builder at the time. The home was already built, so it already, you know, kind of passed the inspections. The sump pump was in place, and we could tell just looking at the house, it was still wet on the side. We have the rain gardens, and they hold water, and it overflows and goes down the street. But we purchased the home anyway because we loved it. We loved the area, and with the hope of talking to the neighbor, it seems like the community is aware of the problem and willing to work towards solving it. It's a little frustrating now because, I think what has really brought this to my attention is next door was an empty lot. It's currently an empty lot, but it's up for sale. So you're going to go from a completely empty lot, it's, pretty much uphill from us, to a new home being built there. So I think this is even more of an imperative for all of us as it very clearly directly affects us. Thank you for all the comments today and for those of you who've come out and listened to us. We really appreciate it. I kind of echo what Jim already said about, obviously number one is the option that will work the best. And I know we keep talking about cost, but at the end of the day, the cost is just not going anywhere. It's just being shifted. It goes wherever the water goes, right? So if it's not being paid for by the builder, which, we would have put into our mortgage, as you said, then it gets shift to the neighbors. And then I did just have one question, and not something that was brought up today, but I don't know if it would come up in future discussions. The cost was the one kind of reason why not to do the on-site detention. And the other thing that I kept hearing was maintenance. And I'm just asking maybe for future, it's a little vague to me what the maintenance means, and what is it, does someone just have to come on site once a year to look at it, or is the owner going out, every month looking at it? So maybe just for future discussion, I think it would be helpful to have a clearer picture of what the burden of maintenance to the homeowner putting in the detention what it would be. So, thank you.
Mayor and Council, I think we can answer that right now. We have some discussion points on that.
Sure. Thank you for your comments. I think you're going to get part of it answered right now.
In most cases, you probably would see a concrete vault underground in a backyard, and then you'd need an outlet for that, which would likely be a pump, just like a sump pump would be. So you would have the maintenance of a vault, you'd have a pump, like most people maintain a sump pump, then you'd have a discharge you have to keep clean. So that would be the typical type of maintenance activities. Keeping things clean, keeping them working, keeping the pumps working, electricity to a pump, things like that.
The homeowners.
Be homeowners.
Thanks. This would all be on private property.
Can we comment from the seat?
No. No, because no one can hear you at home. And we want to make sure that everybody at home can hear what you have to say.
It's only one sentence. So the only kind of reactive statement to that is that the homeowners and the folks that are in these areas, these low-lying areas, are highly motivated and incentivized to make sure that these systems are maintained. That many of us have invested tens of thousands of dollars on our own to solve this problem. If we had a solution that actually worked, we are highly motivated to actually keep the pumps running, keep things dry. We know that if we didn't, those would overflow and create a big, giant problem in our own yards.
Right. I don't think anyone was suggesting that we're saying that maintenance is a barrier to pursuing that. That's just historically one of the things that's been raised as an issue. And you can also imagine, and again, this isn't anything other than just an observation, there's an occasional home in here in town that perhaps doesn't maintain their lawn or other things, and if they stop maintaining those pumps, now you're in a situation of how do we force them to maintain the pumps? It's on private property. So suddenly now maybe you don't have a neighbor that's as passionate, committed, and as mindful and thoughtful as you in your neighborhood, who doesn't all of a sudden.
I think many of us
have
been in that situation, right. For various kind of private property concerns.
Yes.
I think we'd probably handle it in similar ways to issues with fences, issues with
Right.
stuff on our property that we don't want on our property and everything else. But, hopefully this would solve the actual water issue.
Yes, yes. And
Overall.
Not suggesting this is an obstacle to going forward.
Understood.
But just in the spirit of clarifying what that means.
Yes, okay.
Mayor Tully, I think you are unique in that you cared what your neighbor thought. I guess cared in the sense that cared enough that you didn't want to upset your neighbor, that you were willing to spend the extra money to make sure that the water stayed on your property. I think the people we're actually talking about mostly in this situation are builders. They build the house and they're out of here. I know that we do have some builders who live in Downers Grove, but regardless, they're not living in that house. They're not living with those neighbors next door to them. I think we all know that Downers Grove is one of the most desired towns to live in, not just in the western suburbs, but in all of Chicagoland. I think...
Can we hire you to do a promo for us?
Yes, you can. I booked Disney vacations too, so I'd be happy to do this for Downers Grove. But honestly, I feel like you're spending $1 million on a home. What's another $20,000 to $50,000? And I know that probably sounds a little flip, but I'm serious. There's mortgages. It's not like they're going to be paying it all up front. And the difference is, if they're not willing to spend that extra money to retain the water on their property, guess who is spending that money? Their neighbors are. We have spent $30,000 on water projects around our home in 3 years, and we are still in danger. We are not unique. This is happening all over Downers Grove. Is it happening to everybody in Downers Grove? No, it's not. But the other point is that, so we require the builders to do this. It's also saving taxpayers a lot of money. It's saving taxpayers a lot of money in the sense that we're not having to make larger storm sewers. We're not having to make the name of the creek that runs through town. St. Joseph's. We're not having to somehow find a way to make the St. Joseph's Creek wider. We're not having to somehow find a way to make the DuPage River wider. That's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. Those projects would cost hundreds of millions of dollars if we could make it happen. This is costing a builder who, chances are good, doesn't live in Downers Grove $20,000 to $50,000. To me, it seems like a no-brainer to keep your neighbors happy, to keep the citizens of Downers Grove happy, and to do the right thing, frankly, because unfortunately not everybody is as conscientious as you are. I wish they were, but they aren't.
Thank you for your comments, and we'll talk about that promo a little bit later.
Okay.
I appreciate that. But I think you're hearing a fair amount of high level of interest here in the council in the on-site detention option.
Hi, Rich Cullivaney, 6825 Camden. Good evening, Mayor, Council, staff. I wanted to weigh in on this. First of all, I attended a few of the stormwater meetings, found them very interested. Came away thinking, man, this thing is incredibly complex, and a cookie-cutter approach is not going to work because it is going to differ by neighborhood. But I have had the experience of building a home. It was in 1990 in Fairview Point, and we wanted an 8-foot basement, so we built a 9-foot foundation. And after they dug the hole, because I was there every day, we had an area on the southeast corner of our basement that was just never dry. It always had 3 inches of water, no more, no less. So I determined that's where the water table was. Didn't know where it came from, didn't know if it was from Barth Pond or nearby creek, but we knew when we built that house that water was groundwater that was always going to be there. So, we put in our slab, we put in our 4-inch drain tile, we put in our sump pump, which is very active. Planted a river birch in that corner. I don't know if that took care of the problem. It occurred to me later that there was a willow tree across the street that was doing very well. So there was obviously a lot of water in that particular neighborhood. So a couple things come to mind. What other places could do is, like for instance in Wheaton, they have a thing that you can actually raise your basement. And you can do it by, if you raise your basement by your foundation by up to 3.5 feet, it will not count towards the overall building height. Now I understand why we have a building height restriction and also a setback restriction, because you don't want to have these issues of shadows. And you don't want, other people's properties kind of overgrown. But I don't think shadows are costing us $3.8 or $4 million a year in stormwater. We're certainly not spending $32 million over X number of years to fight shadows. And even though Wheaton didn't put that in place to solve that particular problem, it might be something you want to take a look at. The other thing that occurred to me is the way they're supposed to do is they're supposed to dig a hole, and they're supposed to put all the clay back in one pile and then scrape the topsoil off and put that in another pile. And by best practices, they're supposed to take the clay and put it around first, do the backfill, and then take the topsoil and fill it on top of that. So maybe you have this much topsoil. What also came up in the stormwater meetings is that not all contractors are doing that. In other words, what's happening is the clay is getting distributed where the topsoil. So I don't know if there's something that could be done, for instance, in an inspection process, that they make sure that they're checking that the grading was done on the clay first and then the topsoil. But as my finishing comments, I think you have to be bold on this. If you are putting a $1.1 million home in, and you have to spend another $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to stop one of the biggest problems in the village, I think that's really worth it. And I think the village should really consider that. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Other questions from the audience? All right, well, thank you for everyone that took the time to come down and share their views with us. Final questions or comments from the council? Obviously, we're not taking any definitive action tonight. Commissioner Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor. I also just wanted to thank everyone that spoke tonight. Obviously, given the discussion up here, you can see that this is a very challenging issue for us, but one that is not going away and has not gone away. We have continued to receive emails, talked with people at Coffee with the Council about this issue. And I am also starting to lean towards this requirement of on-site stormwater detention, but would also be interested in seeing if there is a way to incentivize. I don't know how we would do that yet, but I'd be interested in learning more about that as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Waldeck.
Thanks again. Based on the comments of the residents, I think it gets us back to the basic question is, being a council, and we, naturally we want to make everybody happy, but given the choices and the problems, sometimes you just can't do that. And so we have to prioritize, are we going to go back to the property rights and developers and this is an anti-developer, but developers come in, they build, and they leave. Maybe the builder is doing it for a particular purchaser. That's all well and good. Is our priority the new construction, or is the priority the neighborhood? The people who are there, the people who are already living there? Because if somebody comes in and they're building something that's similar to what's already there, if it's a 3-bedroom ranch, so many square feet, and they're not changing anything, things haven't changed. But if somebody comes in and wants to build something larger, takes up more impervious space, will create more problems. Where's our priorities? And for me, I know that the priority is the neighborhood. Things improving for the neighborhood in general. And so when we look at new construction, we ought to look at it from those eyes, from the neighborhood eyes, rather than the developer, builder, new owner, the new construction side. So that's a question I ask myself, and maybe we should all ask ourselves where we are. Is it the neighborhood, or is it the new construction? That's it.
Thanks, Commissioner. Anything else at this point? If not, thanks for the terrific discussion. Everyone who participated, thank you. Obviously, more to come on this. And I think that would be the end of our first reading.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, very good. Well, that brings us to item 9, the mayor's report, and all the activities of Fire Prevention Week have already been gone into earlier by Chief Pendelski, so I don't need to go into that. But I do have something I need to read as an official matter in my capacity as the liquor commissioner, as I previously pointed out. And this is with respect to Brick House Tavern and Tap liquor license application. The village has received an application for a Class R1 full alcohol on-premise consumption liquor license and an application for a Class O outdoor liquor license from Brick House Acquisition, Inc., doing business as Brick House Tavern and Tap, located at 1461 Butterfield Road. Pursuant to Section 3-12 of the Liquor Control Ordinance of the Village of Downers Grove, a public hearing for a liquor license application may be waived. The application must be placed on file for a minimum of 2 weeks, subject to public comment prior to the issuance of a new license. At this time, I am placing these applications on file with the village clerk's office. Barring any objection, once the 2-week waiting period is passed, liquor licenses shall be issued to Brick House Acquisition, doing business as Brick House Tavern and Tap, located at 1461 Butterfield Road, placed on file October 10th, 2017. That's my report. Item 10, Village Attorney's Report. Ms. Petrarca.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that report. I only have one item to present tonight, and that is the ordinance we discussed earlier, increasing the number of beer and wine recreational licenses. It will be on next week's active agenda. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. That brings us to item 11, which is reserved for council member reports. This is an opportunity for members of the village council to share with those here and watching at home either items of interest or other goings on in the community, or to share something with us from their perspective as liaisons to other entities. I'll start with Commissioner Barnett tonight. Good evening.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a brief congratulatory comment to some folks at our library. There was a Illinois Library Association conference in Tinley Park this week, and a couple of staff members from our team were awarded. Jen Fredericks won a Technical Service Award for making substantial contributions to cataloging and streamlining workflows at our public library. And Lynette Petrick won the Young Adult Librarian of the Year Award for implementing services that promote the love of literature and library among our teams. So it's awesome that we have a fantastic library. It's even more awesome when they get recognized beyond our boundaries. Congratulations to both of them.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And please extend our congratulations and best wishes to them for those accomplishments. Commissioner Earl.
No report, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Jose.
Thank you, Mayor. In light of Fire Prevention Week, I just wanted to say thanks to Chief Pendelski and everybody in the fire service for all of their brave and tremendous work on behalf of the residents of the village. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Waldeck.
No report, Mayor.
When's the crap walk coming up?
I haven't been informed of that.
I think it's this coming weekend.
It could be. It's that time of year.
I think is somebody kicking it off this year?
It's.
Oh, you are. I know it's not me because I'm out of town. I thought you might be. I was trying to.
No, I
trying to help you along.
I have not been advised. I'm no longer on that board.
Okay. My apologies.
Not a problem.
Commissioner Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor. District 99 will hold 4 informational meetings and tours about its proposed master facility plan for North High School and South High School in Downers Grove. There are 4 nights that you could attend. Thursday, October 12th at North High from 7 to 9. Thursday, October 19th at South High from 7 to 9 p.m. Saturday, October 21st at North High from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. or Saturday, October 28th at South High from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. Information presented will be similar but not identical. Content will vary based on location. Optional tours of each school will follow the presentations. Registration is requested but not required, and you can visit www.csd99.org/MFP to register. And also this Friday, October 13th, South will host the annual Crosstown Classic, South High versus North High game. In a show of true community connection and crosstown support, all students will be participating in a pink out for cancer awareness. So feel free to attend the game, show your support in pink or blue or purple. Thank you, Mayor.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner White.
Well, continuing with the District 99 theme, I'm very pleased to report that I have the great honor of attending a ceremony tomorrow to recognize two students from South High, Danny King and Jake Burrows, who've been selected to the U.S. Army All-American Marching Band. This is really a rather remarkable honor that there's approximately 125, 130 students from all across the United States that are chosen to be in this band, and Downer South has two of them at the same time. So, with the very unfortunate situation that Mayor Tully cannot attend, I have the pleasure of going there tomorrow to present village resolutions to both students, and I'm very much looking forward to that. I think, I myself am a graduate of South High. I was in the music department in Marching Mustangs many decades ago. I'm not sure we fully appreciate how strong the fine arts are at both South High and North High. My daughter spent 4 years in orchestra at North High. The music programs in this community are just absolutely outstanding, and I'm very much looking forward to being part of this event tomorrow. And on a related note, on Saturday, October 14th, is the Marching Mustang Music Bowl, where 24, no fewer than 24 high school marching bands will perform on the varsity field at South High. And as a former member of the District 99 Board of Education, former board president of the District 99 Board of Education, one of my most pleasurable accomplishments was when we voted to install our artificial turf fields. Because there's absolutely no way 24 marching bands can march on a grass field and have anything left. But because there's synthetic turf at both North and South High, gym classes, marching, it's really for the marching band. They said it was a football team. No, it's really for the marching band. But that's actually going to happening on Saturday. So if you buy South High and hear lots of loud brass music for about 12 to 14 hours, that's going to be why. Because there's going to be 24 marching bands following the fact that two Marching Mustangs are going to receive a national honor tomorrow. And finally, on Sunday, we are going to start Crop Walk, and once again, thanks to Mayor Tully having other commitments, I'll be at that to kick that off. So thank you, that's my report.
Thank you very much. And because of those other commitments, I also won't be here next Tuesday to announce a couple of things that are coming up later this month, so I'm going to take the opportunity to do so now real quickly. First is just to remind everyone that the annual Helping Girls Navigate Adolescence Pancake Breakfast will be taking place on October 24th at Valley Dwell Pub in beautiful downtown Downers Grove. Best suburb in the entire Chicago metropolitan area. Thank you very much. That will be from 8 o'clock in the morning until 11 o'clock in the morning. Of course, that happens at the same time as the window painting activities that happen next week that I'm sure my colleagues will talk about next week.
Are you sure it's the 24th? That's a Tuesday.
It's 2 weeks. It's the 20th. It's the 21st.
Oh, gosh, I'm sorry. This is an
So we
old.
will talk about it next week.
This is an old one. So hold on a second. Let me get my facts straight here. Glad you guys are paying attention.
10th, 17th, 24th, 31st. Those are the Tuesdays.
Yes, I take that back. It would be October 21st would be the Helping Girls Navigate Pancake Breakfast. I was looking at the information from 2015. Shame on me. So it's October 21st, Saturday, October 21st, from 8 o'clock until 11 o'clock a.m., also in conjunction with the activities that will be happening downtown. So thank you for pointing that out. You know, that Google machine, it's good, but sometimes you have to check your facts. And October 29th, the Family Shelter Service is doing their annual 5K and 10K run. That is at 9 o'clock a.m. on October 29th, and that will be held this year on the campus, or proximate to the campus of Midwestern University. That's also another wonderful event for a terrific organization that is here in our home and helps to support, to oppose and to support those who are victims of domestic violence. So that's the end of my report. And with that, I will go to the manager report, which will take place in the committee room. So we cannot adjourn tonight. What we'll be doing is we will be recessing to the committee room to have our next in a series of meetings with respect to the proposed fiscal 2018 budget in lieu of passage of an appropriation ordinance. And so with that, I will ask for a motion to recess into the committee room for that discussion. Of course, we'd invite everyone to join us as we continue our budget discussion for fiscal 2018.
Mayor Tully, I move that this council recess to the committee room to continue our annual budget discussion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are recessed into the committee room. We will reconvene in about 10 minutes. For those of you watching that are in the room here, thank you very much. Good night and go Cubs. Which is our next meeting in a series of meetings regarding the proposed fiscal year 2018 budget. Mr. Fieldman, good evening. I'll let you kick things off, please.
Mayor and Council, just a reminder, this is the proposed budget. As the mayor said, this is the second of about 10 opportunities to discuss the budget and the property tax levy. A couple of key points about the budget is the annual implementation of many long-range plans and other planning documents that have been discussed throughout multiple years. Therefore, if you've been following along, as most of us in the room have, there are really no surprises in the budget. Most of the policy decisions that drive this budget have been made over the summer as part of long-range planning. Our budget process is participative and transparent with 10 meetings total, most of them happening on Tuesday nights, with the budget posted on our website. That actually occurred in late September. It's a very deliberative process. It takes about 3 months from the time the budget is published until it's actually adopted, including the adoption of the tax levy. I wanted to remind everybody of the key points found in this year's budget. Number one, the general fund, which is our main operating fund, is a planned use of reserves budget with revenues slightly less than planned expenses to the tune of about $320,000, driven entirely by the state's one-time holdback of 10% of the income tax revenue to municipalities. Because it is a one-time measurable event, we are proposing a one-time measurable response to that loss of revenue. We will maintain our fund balance at the recommended 39% of annual expenses. This budget does include revenue from the recently enacted yet soon to be effective food and beverage tax. It's about $1.5 million a year we expect from that. That tax becomes effective on January 1st. The property tax levy is flat in all categories except for the required contribution of public safety pensions, which is going up by $550,000 or so, about a 4.3% increase. The budget is also reflective of further reductions in staff. We're now approaching about a 20% reduction in staff over the last decade. This is through attrition. There are no layoffs or separations planned. These are positions that have already become vacant and have not been filled. Those are some of the key items we went over at our first meeting, focusing on the general fund and the property tax levy. Tonight, you'll hear us talk about the remaining 3 key points. You will see in the budget that there is funding to implement the direction the council has provided on facilities planning. Mr. Baker will go over that this evening. There is a contribution to other post-employment benefit unfunded liability to the tune of $300,000. You may recall this was a major topic of discussion over the summer as part of long-range planning. And we'll kick off tonight with our discussion of our continued commitment to invest in our infrastructure to keep our infrastructure in top quality condition while maintaining the lowest life cycle cost. With that, it is my proud privilege to introduce our Public Works Director, Nan Newland, to kick off the discussion about infrastructure.
Thank you, Dave.
Good evening.
Good evening again.
Once again.
We're here to talk about capital, and I'm here to kick off the discussion about the funds that support the village's infrastructure. This information is found in the Stormwater, Water, and Capital Projects funds, which are located in tab 6 of the budget book and beginning on page 12 of the budget message. Here tonight also, we have John Welch, who's our Assistant Director of Public Works for Engineering, and our Stan Balicki, our Assistant Director of Public Works for Operations. John's going to come up and talk about our Capital Projects Fund, and Stan will be talking to you about our Water Fund. This is not my favorite. The proposed 2018 budget includes over $21 million for continued substantial investment in the village's infrastructure. 41% of that amount is for improvements to the water fund, which is shown here on the pie chart in blue. This pie chart's on page 13 of the budget message. 28% is for the improvement to the street system, which is shown in light blue, and 17% is for stormwater and drainage improvements, shown here in green. About 14% is combined improvements in the areas of sidewalks, traffic, major buildings, parking, and forestry. First, we're going to talk about the Stormwater Fund, and I'm going to be covering that tonight. We're going to kick off with a video to show a little bit of the background of
Stormwater
our
management system is extremely large. It consists of 12 miles of creeks, 475 stormwater detention facilities, 130 miles of storm sewers, 47,000 feet of culverts, 140 miles of ditches, and 7,000 drainage structures. Some portions are modern and function well. Some portions are decades old, are undersized, and don't meet modern regulations. The entire system needs to be maintained for it to continue to function properly. You can learn more about stormwater in the Stormwater Utility Report at www.downers.us.
This was one of the many videos that was produced for the stormwater utility that's found on the village website. Just gives people a background on our system. And the information in the budget can be found on pages 4-20 through 4-22. Next, this is an overview of the projected revenues and expenses in 2018. We have revenues of approximately $4.4 million that include $4.2 million from stormwater utility fees and about $200,000 from grants and developer contributions. There's a planned 8.5% revenue increase in the stormwater utility in 2018 to fund maintenance and capital projects. We'll continue to work on capital projects that reduce flooding and drainage throughout the village, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that tonight. There will be a spending down of fund balance with expenditures about $2.1 million more in 2018 than the projected revenues. And a bond issuance is planned for 2019 to continue the construction of stormwater projects. The $6.5 million of planned expenses include $1.9 million for operations and maintenance, $1.1 million for debt service, and $3.5 million for capital improvements. And those capital improvements include the largest one being SW080 in the capital improvement plan, which will be projects that were recommended in the 2014 stormwater project analysis for things like land acquisition, design, and construction. That will include, it also includes replacing failing storm sewers and a variety of other projects throughout the village. This shows the locations of the 6 projects that are planned to be built in 2018 for a total cost of about $2.4 million that were recommended in the stormwater project analysis in 2018. And in 2017, you'll recall we recently awarded some projects in the last month or two. We will be completing 5 major projects from that analysis for a total of about $1.9 million in 2017 for a combined total of 11 projects in 2017 and 2018. That concludes the overview for the Stormwater Fund, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks, Dan. Questions on the Stormwater Fund? Questions from the audience on the Stormwater Fund? Got 8 more meetings, don't worry.
I'd like to turn over to John Welch as our Assistant
Thank
Director
you.
for Engineering. He'll talk about our capital projects fund.
Thank you, Nan.
Good evening.
Good evening. As Nan mentioned, my name is John Welch. I'll give you a brief overview of activities funded within the Capital Projects Fund. True to form, the next slide is a short video that summarizes the village's street rehabilitation program, which is a very large portion of the Capital Projects Fund.
Do you know that it's cheaper to maintain streets than it is to reconstruct them? Complete reconstruction is expensive and can cost up to $2 million per mile, while resurfacing costs about $425,000 per mile. Downers Grove owns 167 miles of streets, which are routinely evaluated and maintained. With proper maintenance, the street can last for 100 years or more. Routine resurfacing is performed every 15 to 20 years. Here, the asphalt is ground down, keeping the road base intact, and new asphalt is applied. Other maintenance activities include pavement sealing, crack sealing, pothole filling, and asphalt patching, all done to prevent the need for costly reconstruction. Managing village streets is a high priority, and our goal is to maintain drivable conditions at the most cost-effective level. You can learn more about street maintenance at downers.us.
So, village objectives for the management of our capital infrastructure program are to use a systematic approach. We coordinate the timing of projects and try and group projects to achieve an economy of scale. An overview of the Capital Projects Fund. In fiscal year 18, we're anticipating $8.26 million in revenues with just over $9 million in expenses. Revenues come from home rule sales tax, the property tax, and telecom taxes. Just under $900,000 is expected for road resurfacing grants and a $25,000 grant for bicycle and pedestrian improvements. The proposed budget includes a $300,000 contribution from the Capital Projects Fund to the newly created OPEB Trust Fund, and the $750,000 difference represents the spending down to the fund balance, as Manager Field mentioned earlier. Street projects planned for 2018, as I mentioned before, the roadway maintenance program is the majority of that fund, which includes, like the video said, grinding and overlay, crack sealing, pavement sealing, and that is the largest portion of the $4.5 million. There's an additional $1.3 million in MFT, motor fuel tax, for a total expenditure of about $5.8 million on streets next year. The other capital projects shown at the bottom at about $1.7 million are identified on this slide. Sidewalks are the large portion of that $1.7 million, with a total of about $824,000, which includes the first of a 2-year program to install sidewalks within the West Burlington area west of Belmont, north of the tracks, up to Ogden. We also have funding for emerald ash borer treatment, traffic signal upgrades, and bicycle and pedestrian improvements. The village spent over $370,000 for sidewalk maintenance and improvements this year, and shown here are some newly constructed improvements at Maple and Carpenter, and a typical example of the Safe Step firm that comes in and does some grinding where we get some vertical discrepancies that I'm sure you've seen throughout town, and there are some right out here outside of Village Hall. Based on that, I will open it up to any questions from council.
Thank you. Questions? Bob?
Question, Mayor. Less about the presentation, just more about looking at the table at 429. Are the 19 and 20 numbers just sort of placeholder darts that anticipate some facility efforts? Is that what's going on? They look dramatically different than any other fund.
Are you talking about village facilities?
Capital Projects Fund 429, years 19 and 20, which of course are obviously estimates, but they look to be sort of placeholders anticipating some sort of efforts at facilities. Start to run through negative and anticipate big grants.
You're talking about the out years on capital projects fund, right?
Big grants shown that don't look historically normal, and deficit runs and things like that.
We usually adjust those when we get to the current year, so that reads a little bit more like a wish list, and then each year when it becomes current, we have to true up to our funding that's available.
So they're not, when you look at $4 million in capital assets and $3.6 million in grants in 20, those aren't just dark placeholders for facility efforts, they're just kind of random numbers?
No, I want to make sure I understand. You said the word facility. Are you talking about village facility? Police? Mr. Baker will get into that in a second when we get in a different fund.
Right.
So it is not in this fund.
All right.
Sorry for the confusion.
I needed clarification, thank you.
Other questions on this segment? Questions from the audience?
The OPEB trust, why did it come out of this fund as opposed to anywhere else? Is it just because there was more money in this fund? And
Yes.
And so it has nothing to do with employees?
Correct. So you may remember in the summer during long-range planning, we identified this as an issue that needs to be addressed going forward, that the provision of required health benefits to retirees was creating an unfunded liability, and rating agencies and GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, is requiring all municipalities to account for this in the same or similar manner that we account for pension obligations. We are putting together a strategy and a plan that will take us to sustainability over the long term. That plan will be presented later in 2018 for implementation in 2019 and beyond. However, it was important to get a start on making contributions to the OPEB unfunded liability, especially before we undertake any debt issuances planned for 2019. So what we did was very opportunistic. We knew that it was part of our plan to make a contribution in 28, and we simply looked for the fund that could actually afford that contribution. So it is a combination of a long-term, well-thought-out strategy and an opportunistic approach to this year's funding. So I think you asked, why is it from this fund? Is that the one that has the money? Yes, that's the answer to that question.
Thank you. Other questions?
We'll turn it over to
Good.
Mr.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you,
Stabilicki,
Council.
who will talk about the water fund.
Good evening, Stan.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Nice to see everybody. As was mentioned, I will be providing an overview of the Water Fund this evening for 2018. The Water Fund is an enterprise fund, and the revenue for that fund is generated from fees that our water customers pay. The objectives, and we have 3 of those objectives for the Water Fund, include providing safe and reliable drinking water, operating and maintaining the system in the most cost-effective manner, and third, achieving stable and sufficient water rates. The next few slides will give just a little bit of a background over kind of the major components of the water system. We have 7 elevated storage tanks. Those tanks have a storage capacity of approximately 8 million gallons of water. We have 6 rate control stations throughout the system. Those are the locations where we take in Lake Michigan water that is provided by the DuPage Water Commission. We have approximately 2,800 fire hydrants throughout the village that obviously provide fire protection for us. 233 miles of water distribution main, which is the water main that runs through the right-of-way, delivering that water throughout the community. We have approximately 2,800 mainline valves that allow us to perform maintenance or repairs on the system and isolate sections of the system to do that. And then we also have our SCADA system. It's a supervisory control and data acquisition system. It's what we use on a daily basis to monitor and control the water system from the Public Works facility. The next slide is a summary of the revenues and expenses for the Water Fund for FY 2018. As you can see, revenues are expected to be approximately $21.2 million, and the expenses are at approximately $22.5 million for next year. There are 2 components to the water rate, as you can see on this slide. One of them is the purchase of water from the DuPage Water Commission, and the second is the cost of maintaining the water system infrastructure. Now, there's no planned rate increase for the cost of maintaining the village's water infrastructure. I think we've been able to do a good job of controlling costs. A portion of this cost control an example of it has been through the use of our IEPA revolving loan program that we've been using for the capital projects. A small rate increase to cover the cost of purchasing water may occur. This is really dependent upon what the City of Chicago or the DuPage Water Commission may do relative to the cost of water that we have to purchase. Now to just break down the expenses a bit further, of those $22.45 million in expenses, the largest single expense category that we have is the cost of water itself at $8.74 million. That's about 39% of the total expense budget. Operations and maintenance is at $3.97 million. Debt service is at $1.11 million, and capital expenses are expected to be $8.63 million, which, as you can see, the second largest category. That's just behind the cost of water itself. That's about 38% of the total expense budget for 2018. With respect to the capital expenses for 2018, just a little bit more detail. You can see that overall, we've got that $8.6 million in capital expenses. The major expense category for that is water main replacement. There's a project there on 55th Street, as well as the overall annual element for water main replacement. Those two projects together total about $7.68 million, which is about 89% of the overall capital budget for 2018. And we also continue with our components in capital for well rehabilitation, continuation of storage tank and facility maintenance programs for next year. And that concludes the overview of the water fund budget. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Dan. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the water main replacement? Because those are a couple numbers, as you pointed out, that in FY 2018, it's 4 times what we've done in the last, well, certainly this year, and then double it with the year before. And then we anticipate we're going to have another big ticket item for water main replacement, probably tank painting, I'm guessing, in projected for 2019. That $8 million bucks or so is being driven primarily by the 55th Street project?
That's a fairly significant project. That is intended to be coordinated with some other work that...
Is that the work the county's doing?
Correct.
Yep. Okay.
So that is one of the drivers of that, getting that done at the same time.
Okay. Which makes sense.
That is somewhat related, partially related question. On the annual element of water main replacement, are we spending enough each year, or if we maintain the current rate, we can fully replace the system as it wears out? In other words, are we accruing a replacement deficit? Does that question make any sense? Mm-hmm. Or are we spending enough each year so that after 100 years we will have replaced enough that we really haven't lost ground?
Yeah, I understand, and I talked about this along with Judy and Nan. I think it predates your time on the council. In 2010, we did a comprehensive water rate study, which is labeled water rate study, but it really was a sustainability study in the water system, and it was exactly that, looking at the overall condition, how much should we replace each year to maintain a sustainability, and thinking of life cycle costing and expected life of each pipe. At that time, we started ramping up because we were falling a little bit behind before that, and this is part of a multi-year plan to do exactly what you said, Commissioner White, which is spend the money on a regular basis, looking at an annual replacement cycle. All indications are we're about 6-7 years into that plan that we think this is the right amount, and if we keep doing this kind of investment, we will be on that life cycle replacement.
So our grandchildren won't have a staggeringly huge bill when everything fails at once.
That's correct.
That's the goal, to not let that happen.
And in that era of 2010 to 2012 is when we went through all of our major systems and put ourselves on sustainability plans, and we planned a little bit of catch up in 3 or 4 of the major systems, and now we're trying to and have achieved really a sustainable annual cost and replacement.
And that's also why in the stormwater fund there's $500,000 a year for storm main replacement.
That's exactly right. So streets,
In stormwater and water, the three major systems, these are similar stories because we did the same types of study in the same era. And so we're on multi-year plans. And to your point, this amount of investment, which is significant, is the number required to make sure that it's sustainable for generations to come.
It keeps us even, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
For budgetary purposes, how do you define an annual element? I mean, you broke out annual element 6.9 million, but then you separately broke out the 55th Street one for 750. So how do you define it, what makes it fall into a separate category or an annual element? Generally speaking.
I think I can answer. The reason 55th Street was called out on its own is because we entered into an intergovernmental agreement with the county to pay for that project. We knew it was coming up as part of that project. A lot of times with the annual element, we're not 100% sure which segments we're going to do each year. We budget a certain amount of money. We have a list of projects, and we're also at the same time fine-tuning which streets we're going to be resurfacing. Like John said in his presentation, we look for economy of scale, and we look to bundle projects together. So we call it an annual element because we have a target amount of money to spend. We kind of know what areas to address, and then but we haven't really made a final decision on which exact segments it's going to be or which street segments yet until all the pieces are coming together.
And you kind of look at the engineering portion of it, combining projects.
How much work we can get done.
Getting money
We have
from
to do
other
some cost
sources.
estimating to see how many segments we can do.
And if you said if you decrease that dollar value, then we're obviously just going to decrease in our number of water main replacements this year, so.
Not tonight, but for the number of water main replacements that go into that 6.9 number that are not the 700,000 or so that goes into the 55th Street project, just to get an idea of what's anticipated, where there's going to be, only because it's a big jump from last year, in what water mains and what parts of town, if we know. I know we know because that's where the number came from, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, we'll give you the initial indications. Nate just
Right.
mentioned we have a general idea. We'll get you that same general idea.
Right, I get, because I understand the 55th Street one, because that's done in conjunction with the significant work that the county's doing on 55th Street. But the other almost $7 million that we're doing in FY 2018. Breakdown, but I don't need it tonight. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And the well rehab, is that just, trying to keep it in backup condition, or?
I can speak to that. That is intended to fund design work on some improvements to the 3 remaining backup wells that we have in preparation for some work to come in future years.
So we aren't really using those wells. They're just for emergency purposes, right?
They are correct. We don't use those except in an emergency. We have not activated those since we've been on Lake Michigan water, early 1990s. So.
And the other part of that that Stan's talking about is we are required under our operating agreements with the DuPage Water Commission to have working backup wells. And so that's an ongoing policy discussion and decision at the DuPage Water Commission level. But until there's any changes made, we are obligated to have, I think, 3 was the number?
We have 3 remaining, yes.
So.
Do we have to test those wells?
We do.
Great.
Bob?
2 questions, just following up, I think what Martin was getting at with that number, even if it's kind of WAG numbers, what a 3 or 4 or 5 year curve might look like. Because those 2 years together, 18 projected and 19 estimated, probably better choice of words. There are 6-8 years worth of work, at least numerically. So I'd be interested in understanding more about what the 5-year plan looks like for that. And then the other thing, just as to entertain Bob's curiosity, if we could get those sales in gallons or some other unit measurement, not unlike, I'm suspecting and hoping the actual units are going down.
Yes, they are.
And not unlike other utilities that are taxed, we have to be a little bit sensitive to, projecting revenues based on units that we attend and everybody's best efforts are decreasing.
You may recall we put together that multi-year plan that we did plan for, I think, about a 1% per year decline,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think we were seeing that. I don't want to speak.
Yes, it's been a consistent decline.
It's arguably a good thing, but something I'm still interested in seeing.
And the maintenance costs go up, so the per unit,
Right.
that's the
Well,
issue.
you got, in here, you got 2% increase in cost estimated, and you still have some, obviously have less units, but what that trend looks like over time and how we might project it out, I'd like to see that.
Sounds like there's some interest in just dusting out that plan, which still holds true, so we'll get that information out to the council.
Is it possible just to approximately say the life cycle, the life expectancy of a given segment of water main? Is it 50 years, 75 years?
We have that in the report. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Averages included in the report. We've seen some variability. Ground conditions affect the life of the acidity and the transmission of electric current through pipes because of soil conditions can shorten a pipe length. We've seen that in some neighborhoods. We're finding kind of through literature, there's certain eras of pipe manufacturing that the quality wasn't as good. So some of the pipes, I think it was like in the 50s and 60s, is that right? Where
Yes.
they're finding, because of the quality of the cast iron, they're not getting the life out of it. So I'm saying there's some averages assumed, but there's some variabilities we've even seen in our own system in some neighborhoods where it's mostly seen by the number of water main breaks we get, and then when we dig it up, the condition that we're finding the water main in when we dig it up.
If you're interested in looking at this, I think it's the 2015 long-range plan update that has a nice little summary of that multi-year plan. It's got the map of how old all the pipes are, what the expected life is, et cetera. So we'll take that out and get you a link.
Thank you. Questions from the audience on water fund?
The life cycle of a water main.
Stan finds this stuff fascinating.
What is fascinating?
Coming soon to National Geographic.
Thanks, Stan.
Life cycle of water main. Thanks, Stan.
I think we'll do a little bit of roadie adjustment here to get the next presentation going, right?
Yep.
Should actually get quick. So as Commissioner Barnett was asking about, and as we had previewed on our key points, one of the key elements of the proposed FY18 budget is continued funding to implement facilities direction that was provided by Council over the summer as part of the then priority action item facilities sustainability plan. So Mr. Baker, who is the project manager on that project, will now show us how the FY18 budget relates to that direction. Mike?
Thank you, Dave. We did want to remind council the direction that was provided as a result of the efforts that we went through earlier this year on facility planning, but they're represented by the 3 bullets up at the top of the whiteboard there. First being in 2019, we would reevaluate options for replacement of the police station and Village Hall. In the meantime, we will maintain the buildings at the lowest possible cost and continue saving money to be used for building improvements in 2019 and beyond. So I really just wanted to show you how the budget as prepared supports that direction. So we have really 2 areas where funds are being accumulated for future facility project work. The Asset Forfeiture Fund, which is page 4-40 of the budget document. By the time 2019 rolls around, we expect there'll be approximately $2 million available in that fund. We did confirm with the Department of Justice that money is not in jeopardy and doesn't have to be used within a specific time frame, so long as it is committed to facility improvements as we've intended. And then the other fund is the Major Buildings Fund, where we're accumulating the revenue from the gasoline tax that was previously used for Fairview Avenue improvements, approximately $200,000 per year. So we're showing that revenue in fiscal year 2017, 2018, and 19. So by the time we're into 2019, we expect that we'll have approximately $600,000 of revenue from that source available. So $2.6 million in total. The only project that appears in 2018 is Village Hall roof replacement. And again, this is a budgeted figure. Before that project comes forward to council for approval, we'll make sure it is absolutely in line with the goal of maintaining the building at the lowest possible cost. Be happy to answer any questions.
I'll take a stab at answering Commissioner Barnett's question he asked just a few minutes ago. On page 4-32 of your budget book is the major buildings fund, and you'll see on the left-hand side there a handful of projects totaling $511,000. That's for all village facilities. That's what's planned for this year's budget. These numbers, there's also some numbers looking out for facility maintenance items. Those are cost estimates that we've obtained through research and discussion that we're just following up with a plan that we talked about over the summer. So the numbers that we show in the next year are not wags or targets or guesses. They're pretty well-informed cost estimates. As far as future facilities costs, that is yet to be determined in 2019 based on council policy direction.
Go for it, Bob.
Two things. First is we maintain existing buildings at the lowest possible cost. Do we have any ability, or have we considered any ability to, probably only this building is where this relates to, but actually sort of purposefully abandoning portions of it? I mean, physically detaching utilities. I'm really talking about heat, light, heat, power, but to further reduce the cost of operating this property.
We started to have those discussions a couple of years ago. The initial finding was that a lot of the way the utilities and support structures in here wasn't real easy to sort of shut down parts of the building, as you may be familiar with that. So we haven't looked at that probably in, probably 2 or 3 years was the last time we looked at that, but we certainly can do so.
Well, we don't have any solutions currently on the table, but I think we do have a consensus that there'll be something dramatic at some point. So every nickel we cannot spend operating this thing between now and whatever that point is valuable. Do we have any flexibility, and choice of words, but in the gas tax rate, as we're trying to accumulate, the goal seems to be here to try and accumulate revenue?
The local gasoline tax that was previously used for the Fairview Avenue debt service, I think we do have some. What's that?
Is there another name for that tax?
No.
Good answer, Dave. Do we have any flexibility?
Real good answer, Dave.
That's not, the one you're insinuating, it's not that portion. That's why I want to make sure. That was a different transportation-related tax, which we don't have anymore.
It was still fun.
Yeah.
But do we have any flexibility in the rate on that at all?
I believe we do have some control over that. Mike, do you remember the answer?
Yeah, I believe this represents 1.5 cents per gallon. There was another penny per gallon that came off. Yeah, that sunset a few years back. I think that was tied to the transportation system in the Grove commuter shuttle.
Right, eliminating the deficit of the transportation fund.
Yep.
So yeah, we have some flexibility to reinstate those things.
I'd like us to all think about that. I mean, that's not that anybody ever likes any taxes, but it's a tax that is to some degree, discretionary in terms of who pays it. It draws from outside of our community, and if the point here is to try and build funds to be used at some point, I'd like us to think about that.
We got to change the name then.
I think we know what we would call it.
We can do that on a Tuesday night.
It was like naming rights for a stadium. You're welcome to it.
With a big down arrow?
No, we do the opposite. We threaten to name it after you until you pay up.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as facilities, I mentioned last week that I am open to finding ways to increase that pot of money that we're going to need, because we're certainly not socking away enough money to help the situation. I mean, there's going to be a lot more money needed. So whether it's a gas tax, small property tax increase, because when we were considering the options that we had, there were going to be property tax increases over a long period of time to pay off a debt service. So I certainly would consider helping fund that facilities a little more. We're going to have to pay sooner or later, and we might as well start now. And there's not a lot of people jumping in, Bob.
Not a fun thing to talk about.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
The Billy Bob Gasoline cans.
I appreciate the sentiment of wanting to put the money aside, but I continue to think that there's ways to leverage existing assets without raising taxes to achieve the goal.
You don't want to tax puppies?
No. Or rainbows.
How about unicorns? Thanks, Mary.
Oh, sure, if there's unicorn, we'll exit.
All right. Well, at least we settled it. Yeah, I also struggle with the idea of raising a tax now for a building that we will hypothetically build at some point. We've been talking about the facilities solution in this community for the better part of the last decade, maybe more. This council alone has done it twice. If we're going to ask our community to step up and help fund a solution to our facilities challenges, then we darn well better have a solution to our facilities challenges. I don't think you just start socking money away on a hypothetical. And this council, frankly, has failed to do anything other than come up with a hypothetical. And that's on us. Along those lines, I've got no interest in paying for a roof replacement. We know these buildings need to go. I'm sorry. And this, our employees, whether they're in the police department or here at Village Hall, deserve a better place to work. And we're spending money on maintaining buildings that we know ought to go. And that is the definition of fiscal irresponsibility. And shame on us for doing it.
Well,
thanks.
I think it'd be irresponsible to move forward with facilities before the future downtown project is finished.
You're entitled to your opinion.
Yeah. All I know is that if you were in Village Hall chambers earlier tonight, you would have heard the drip, 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 drip of the rain leaking through the roof. Sit over there for a while and you'll hear it. It was quite obvious tonight. So, I don't know. Something's got to be done, otherwise you're going to have the lights over there go out and have an electrical hazard.
You know what I'd like to have done there.
Spend as little as possible until we get to a permanent solution.
I don't think it's irresponsible to sock money away for what you know you're going to need. Families know that they need to sock money away for if they want to buy a house. We have a replacement fund for trucks and police cars and other things that we need. This is just a bigger ticket item. And, we know we're going to do it. We're going to have to do it. Even if it takes another 10 or 20 years, which it certainly shouldn't, but by that time, the burden on the public will be much less if we put some money away. We should have been doing this for the last 10, 15, 20 years anyway. So you can argue, you can argue, that it's irresponsible to put money away.
Well, let's be clear, that's not what I said. What I said was that it's
sorry.
irresponsible to be spending money maintaining a building that we know we ought to knock down. I don't have a problem with socking money away if we know we've got a solution that we're socking it toward. When you talk about equipment replacement, we know what it is we're buying. If we're decommissioning a fire engine, then we're buying a replacement fire engine, and we know generally what we're going after. We know generally what it'll cost in another 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And we've got a pretty, I think, obvious and long-term commitment to making those purchases. We've done it in the past and we'll continue to do it in the future. On facilities, this council has done nothing but fall on its face.
And that's our political ad for today.
Well, you can call it what you want. It's a failure of this council.
I agree with you, Greg. I just suggest that what we're funding is an easier decision down the road because it's partially funded. I mean, the fact of the matter is that it's not going to cost any less. The fact of the matter is there are vehicles that we all know exist to leverage existing assets to do this. We've been unable to do it for a host of reasons. There's probably at least 4 reasons, depending on who you talk to. But building that fund starts to work against some of the things that have been expressed as concerns about risk. It just starts to mitigate risk by building cash. I'm not disagreeing with your premise.
No, I take your point, but it's a drop in the bucket, and we know costs are only going to go up. Will this even cover the increase in cost based on the delay?
No.
Okay.
It'll make future decision makers feel better when they talk about a cash or loan fund.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, and I don't have anything against the concept of putting money away for a rainy day, no pun intended, drip, drip, drip at Village Hall. But the reason why money has been socked away all these years is very simple, and there are multiple members of this room who have served, I mean, at least 2 of us in this room have served on council in the past, and we didn't put any money back way back then either. Because the idea was that revenue streams were to be used to pay debt service, to leverage building the project. We weren't going to save up $20 million to build something. We were going to borrow funds using debt service to build something and then use that same revenue stream that would have been the socking away to pay the debt service. The other alternative, which has always been more attractive to me, is leveraging those existing assets and then using whatever revenue stream you're talking about to also pay the debt service or any delta that might exist, keeping it as small as possible. So that the reality is that whether you apply it to a piggy bank, or you apply it to a debt service, or you apply it to covering a delta for project costs and for leveraging existing assets, they're all different ways of getting to the same place. I just have my preferences, that's all.
Yeah, Mayor, I'm not disagreeing with you at all, and I'd further state, so that everybody's thinking it through, from a purely financial model, socking away the money is probably the least effective return, because the cost of money is so inexpensive.
Well, right, you're not leveraging it.
You're not leveraging it at all, and you're just putting it under a pillow. But we don't make a lot of decisions in sort of the vacuum of any one category, whether it's finance or technical nature in a finance situation. Oftentimes there's a technical answer that may still not be the one we choose, at least in its entirety, because there's other elements weigh in. So my thoughts on that, and talk about that gas tax, are just trying to find some way to touch on a little bit some of the reluctancy that this group and the one prior has had. That's all. It's not the most efficient use of money, and I totally agree with that. So
I don't have to say anything now. Any other comments or questions? Questions or comments from the audience?
This extra money that you were just talking about, where's it? Because aren't we deficit? We're going into our reserves for this year, so where's this extra money that we were just talking about coming from?
The asset forfeiture fund is money that's generated.
No, I mean to put away for the rainy day, or for facilities down the future when we're deficit spending. So is there really any money to put away anywhere else?
It would be new money.
Yeah.
You're talking about creating new money by, and I understood it, I'll let Bob speak for himself, increasing an existing revenue stream by raising it.
Your point is well taken. You're not wrong. We're talking about semantics.
I was just
Well, no, I think what he's saying is we're accumulating $200,000 into this fund when we're also taking
Yes,
$320 out of the general fund.
Correct.
To pay other expenses.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So are you really putting money away? I mean, we talked about this
No.
with pre-wire, so.
So you're right. You have many, many checkbooks, and you have this little checkbook and that little checkbook, and this one.
So you're saying it's an accounting error?
In a sense, yeah.
Any other questions, observations?
They were all in rounding error territory.
Yeah, and the broadest, and the only reason that
Laser sharp
would propose this is we feel that we're sustainable in the general fund. We wouldn't propose the use of reserve if we didn't feel like the revenues in the next year and the next year were sustainable.
Yeah,
And that's been our track record.
And stay tuned, that might not even happen.
Yeah. So, this is the second of a series of meetings. We've introduced almost all of the revenues and expenses in the budget. At next week's meeting, we'll have the opportunity to talk about some of the smaller funds and how we're making debt service payments and those types of things. So we will be prepared to answer any questions the council has on those issues. That'll get us through October, and then we plan to allow November for further community discussion, council discussion, and start to make our way towards consensus on what this budget will actually look like. And I do want to remind folks that we have a Saturday Coffee with the Council, which is the third Saturday in October, 9 o'clock, Fire Station 2. That is a resident-driven discussion of the council. What any of the attendees would like to talk about is what we will respond to. So it's definitely focused on whatever residents want to talk about. That's all we had for tonight, Mayor.
Just one more. Last week I brought up the idea, the doggy hotel tax, which could be worth about $100,000. That was either, well, it was met with kindness. So it'd be nice to get some feedback on whether it's a good idea, bad idea, or who would support it or not.
Is your concern, Commissioner, that dog won't hunt?
I'm just trying to make man's best friend, that's all.
We'll just spend it on our pet projects.
That might be a wag.
It's definitely time for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn?
Second. All in favor? Aye.